I want to explain to you one of the main challenges to learning a lot of First Nations languages and show you how we get through it. It's one of the more significant ways that Nuxalk and many other First Nations languages differ from English or French, and as a result has in the past been one of the areas that simply translating textbooks or reusing curriculum models hasn't worked. First, I'd like to give some examples in English. So, this is me, and this is my friend Green Steve. I am standing. He is standing. Let's say this is you, and you are standing also. As for Steve, well, I see him, and I see you, and Steve, well, he sees you, and you see him. Also, he sees me. The words I've just used are called pronouns. Ones like I, you, he, she, we, and they are called subject pronouns. And in sentences like I see him and he sees me, the him and me are called object pronouns. The whole list of object pronouns is me, you, him, her, us, them. There's also different words we use for plurals, like you. For the plural, you like use or y'all. But they're the same, whether it's the subject or the object. And notice that the word I use for myself, I, doesn't change if I am saying I am standing or if I say I see him. The same for you are standing or you love me. The you doesn't change. Once you learn just this small selection of words, you have learnt all the vocabulary you need to do most English verbs, though you might have to remember to add that pesky S in he sees or she sees. It's pretty easy. So Nuxalk should be just as easy, right? Wrong. Nuxalk, like many or maybe even most First Nations languages, is quite different in this regard. First, let's look at the I am standing sentences. To stand is ashlisam, and the word for I is a suffix. It goes at the end of the word, ts, which we put on the end of the word to give us ashlisamts. For you, we use the suffix nu to make ashlisam. Usually with he or she, we don't put anything onto the end of the word. So ashlisam means he is standing or she is standing, though we can add on p or t if we want. Ashlisam p, this one is standing. We are standing is ashlisam. You all are standing is either ashlisamap or ashlisamnap, something I'll explain later, but pretty straightforward, connecting to the last letter in the word's root. And to say they are standing, it's either ashlisam now or ashlisamau, with the variation again being because of the last sound of the root word. The only other real variation is that when the action word isn't starting the sentence, we add an S for he or she. So to say he isn't standing, I say ach ashlisams, or to say I want Sarah to stand, I say anaikts ska ashlisams Sarah. So just like English, we have these 6 endings with 3 of them varying depending on the word ending. Pretty similar so far, but now things are about to change. The verb to see is and it's what I'll use in the following examples. So let's compare I am standing to what I say when Green Steve walks in. I see him. So, ashlisam ts. I am standing, and keats. I see him. So the ts is still there, but there's a little e that seems to have been added. So instead of him or her being either nothing or an S like before, now it's a totally different pronoun, and it seems to go before the ts. So maybe the object pronouns are different in, or so maybe the object pronouns are different in Nuxalk too, just like in English? Yes. While we have as ishem now for they are standing, to say I see them, we have deets. So yeah, e and d are very different from either nothing or ow or now. But there are differences here, not just with having a new set of object pronouns. There are also different subject pronouns. For example, here's Red Ted. And when you turn, I know that you saw him, so I want to say, you see him. I don't say, he knew. Instead, I say, he. So the ending for you, if it's the subject, is now. I'll just fill in the rest of the subject endings in this chart here. So when I notice that Red Ted has now seen Green Steve, I say, he sees him. Here comes Blue Sue, and Red Ted and Green Steve both see her. So I say, heat. Blue Sue goes over to you, and you guys look over at Red Ted, and I say, keep. You guys see him. Green Steve comes over to me, and the two of us look over at Red Ted also. Heesh. We see him. So that's all 6 endings, with Mr. Red Ted being our object. Heats, heech, hees, heesh, heap, heat. So, does this mean we just memorize 6 new subject endings and 6 new object endings and then put them together? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. For some things, that works. Like if Red Ted's twin brother shows up and we repeat all the same situations, we get all the same examples but with D instead of E. Deets, dees, and so on. And if my brother, Awesome Adam, shows up and you guys all start looking our way, the object pronoun for us is douche. And it does stay the same all the way across the chart. Douche, douche, douched. To say you see me also fits the pattern. The same if Red Ted sees me. But now we start to see things being added in. Instead of they see me being we use sant. And instead of you guys see me being we say sup. And when Green Steve, Red Ted, Awesome Adam, and myself start seeing, hearing, or helping you, and maybe you and your friend Blue Sue, the patterns are just different. And it can feel like you have to memorize each ending by itself. I mean, something like which we might think should mean they see me, actually means he saw you. These suffixes that we want to break down into their parts but can't are called Portmanteau suffixes. And they're not easy to memorize or practice. You just have to learn them. With some of these words, we even start using some prepositions, little words like with or at, before we put in more information about who is seeing you or who is seeing you along with Blue Sue. All told, there are 28 of these, plus 6 more of what are called passive endings. For example, if all of us start getting shot at by a Nerf gun from somebody out of screen, first I'm shot, tkadinits, then you're shot, tkatst, then Steve and Ted are shot, tkadim, and so on until we're all shot, tkadinish. And of course, there's also commands. So in English, I make a command. I just drop the subject pronoun and say go instead of you go, or hit him instead of you hit him. But in Nuxalk, we use a range of different words for you, as well as different words for him or her or them, meaning there's at least 10 more possible combinations to learn. So 44 in total. And did I mention that there's a whole nother set of transitive verbs where the words end in do, and they have slightly different endings in about half of them or more? Once you start adding up all of the endings to learn, it can really add up. Even without looking at the different combinations of command endings, there's something like 75 to 100 different endings to learn. And even if you really break it down into patterns, it still means learning 9 endings to make 20 combinations using the main pattern, and another 8 for the last that you just memorized, and a bunch more. It's not easy. Now, every language seems to have its challenges. For people learning English, one of the things that takes years to learn really well are phrasal verbs. Why does get on with it mean hurry up, while get down with it means to really enjoy it? These things are super confusing, and there's thousands of them. For Nuu-chah, Cree, Michif, one of these super challenging things is these verb endings. While Nuxalk has 75 to 100 endings, with a few of them being portmanteaus, Cree and Michif have, I think, somewhere over 150, which are somewhere in my head, but I couldn't write them out. And many of the most important ones are things that you just have to memorize, i.e. those portmanteau expressions. The challenge for learners is that while you can learn a lot of English before you start learning phrasal verbs, it's hard to learn a lot of Nuxalk or Cree before you have to start using new endings. And just learning them from a book doesn't really give enough practice. But there are solutions to this challenge. I want to show you a couple ways in which learning this big batch of endings is made much easier. So picture yourself out picking mushrooms. You find a mushroom that you don't know and you want to know if you can eat it, so you go and ask a friend if it's edible. Instead of telling you, they instead drop 100 different types of mushrooms on the table and tell you to memorize them. They give you a handy list. Now, you just like to pick pine mushrooms and only really need to know the 3 or 4 types of edible mushrooms that tend to grow in the same place where you pick your pines. So instead of learning all of them, you just learn the 3 or 4 that grow in the same place where you often find yourself. When you start hanging out on Blue Sue's farm, you discover that there's 4 more mushrooms that grow around the edges of her fields. Then Awesome Adam starts taking you hiking higher up in the mountains, and you learn 3 or 4 more that tend to grow in the alpine. Eventually, you learn them all, and you can hardly remember how you learnt any of them. But you don't just know them, you know where they should be, you know when to expect them, and you're also now comfortable in a lot of different places, doing a lot of different things that you might not have been if you didn't start trying to learn all the mushrooms. The same is true of these verb endings. Start by learning how to play a game of tag or hide and seek. Between asking, "Oh, you think you're going to catch me?" and yelling, "I got you," it won't take long for a pair of endings to be safely stuck in your head. You then go home and call your mom and tell her, "Say no, I love you." And if you want to hear her say it, you can ask her, and you've practiced the same endings in a new context. We can actually plan this out, making a little chart like this where we mark out which endings are likely to be used in a given type of activity, until eventually we have activities that use every ending, including endings that are common in some everyday activities, yet when just put in a book feel more like a weird footnote. So, you spend time learning how to gossip about the neighbor's kids, talking about what your friends have been doing, and in all of your stories you generally use only 4 of the transitive endings and 2 of the not transitive, like the I am standing or the I am running ones. Not that hard to get used to. For more practice, you practice telling little stories about animals or listening to them, and you find that still you're only using the same 4-6 endings total. You then sit down with a friend and watch through the entire Jurassic Park series, talking about who got eaten. 2 more endings down. Time to tell scary stories about things that happened to me last night. Or play acting, telling the teacher what the other kids did to me. There's another group of 3-4 endings. By learning the language through doing activities, one activity at a time, or one group of activities at a time, eventually all the endings will be in your mind without ever having to sit down and memorize them. In fact, when you're all done, you might be like me and argue that there aren't really that many endings after all, and until I start asking you if you know them, and you find that you do, and oh my goodness, there's a lot. Playing basketball uses different endings than cheering basketball. Woo. And that uses different endings than playing tag. Playing tag uses different endings than saying a prayer. But it does use the same endings as telling someone you need a hug. Slowly, bit by bit, you learn new and new ways to use the language, and eventually you have it and can move on to the other big challenges. After all, every language has a few of them. Now, while there are many ways you can go through all of these endings, there are some things that can be done to make it easier. In the videos we make following this, we'll try to never use more than 3 or 4 endings in a single video. Also, we'll learn how to use all of the singular verb endings, basically me, you, him, before we move on to the plurals like we, you all, and they or them. Finally, we'll try to eventually have more than one video focusing on each new ending and add in lots of ideas in the description so you'll be able to find other ways to practice things you're having a hard time with. So, happy learning! And if you would like more information about this, or if you would like copies of our resources to use for your own language, please see the links in the description below.